Tutorial is going to cover the button manager. The button manager is what controls all of the props and devices that are used in one of your plots. So let's go ahead and add this. The first thing we need to do is go to your outliner and create a new folder. I'm just going to title this all plots because we'll want multiple devices within this folder that will then duplicate later when we want to duplicate a plot. So in this now, I'm going to create a subfolder and title this button manager. Then I can right click on this folder and make it our current folder so that everything will be sent to this folder whenever we place it in the play space. So now with that set up, let's drag a button manager into the play space. I'm just going to rotate it real quick. Our first setting is the game manager. So I'm going to select that here. Then we have a failed message. This will display to the player whenever they try to purchase a button, but do not have enough resources to properly purchase it. So this will be a HUD message device. So you can go to your content browser, all, and search for HUD message. And then you can drag it into your play space. I'm first going to title this failure message. Then you can either leave a message here. You can control the duration of the message, as well as the sound that plays. You can make a custom widget. There's a lot of things you can do with a HUD message device, but the only thing that is essential is that you change the message recipient to triggering player. And with that, you can go and select it in your button manager here. Then we have a purchase message. This will again be a HUD message device, so I can select this, hold Alt and drag. Then I'm going to rename this to purchase message. You'll see here that it duplicated all of the settings, so I still have it set to triggering player. But instead, this message will show whenever a player successfully purchases a button. So if I go to my button manager, I can select it right here. Then the next setting we have is a purchase XP. This is going to be a accolades device. So if I search accolade and it'll appear, then you can drag it into your play space. I'm going to title this purchase button XP. Here you can control the settings like the name, the description, the award amount, as well as splash settings and a couple others, but there's nothing essential that you need to change. You can now go back into your button manager and select it here. This XP is what will be awarded to a player whenever they purchase one of the buttons in the plot. So the next setting is the button array. The button array is what's going to control all of the props, devices, prices, increase amounts, and pretty much everything inside of your plot. So let's go ahead and add our first element. Then just drop it down and we'll have lots of settings here. The first is the activate devices. These are different devices which you can use to activate the button. Activating the button will show the items to show, hide the items to hide, remove resources, gain resources. It'll do everything that the button's meant to do. These are how you activate it. So you have three options: mutator zone, a trigger, and a button. All three of these work. You can use multiple simultaneously, but in this tutorial, I'm just going to use a trigger. So go into your content browser and search for a trigger and drag into the play space. But before I do so, I'm first going to create a new folder in my button manager folder, and I'm going to title this button 1. It's good to separate all of your content in different buttons, especially whenever you have a very large plot and you're trying to keep track of everything. Then I'm just going to make this my current folder and drag a trigger into the play space. In this trigger, it's important to note that for the first button in all of your plots, you're going to want to change the activating team to team index 5, because this is going to be used to claim the plot. And if it's not team index 5, then the new players who join the game will not be able to claim it. Other than that, I'm just going to disable visible in game. I'm going to rename this to button trigger 1. And then I'm going to scale it a little bit so that it's the size that I want. Then I can go back into my button manager, go down to our activate devices, and then select this trigger here. That's all I'm going to use for the activate devices in this button. Then we have our activate devices to show. So in the next buttons that get unlocked, this is where you'll add the other activate devices. So these are the things that you want to get enabled. Let's go ahead and add an element, and I want to create another trigger for the next button. So first, let's go ahead and duplicate this trigger, and we're going to rename this to button 2 trigger. Then the team index, because I'm going to assign this plot to team 1, I'm going to want all of the buttons within the plot to be set to activating team index 1. Then I can go back into my button manager and select this as my activating trigger. Then you can add another element. So let's say you want this first button to unlock more than one buttons. You can add this here by just creating a new element in this activate devices to show and selecting whatever thing you want this button to enable whenever it's successfully purchased. But for now, I'm just going to leave this one trigger to be enabled and minimize this. Next, we have our items to show. This will be an array of props that gets shown with this button. So let's go ahead and add a prop in the game. So if I go to my Fortnite browser, or you can import your own custom props as many tycoons do, I'm just going to search for a barrel for the sake of this demonstration. This barrel looks fine. I'll drag it right here into my play space. This is a barrel that I want to show. So I'm just going to call this button 1 prop 1. Then go back into our button manager and select this here. If you want more than one prop to show, you can either create another one and select it here in this array, or what's going to save you time is actually just deleting this, and instead of adding elements one by one, you can select one of your props and drag it underneath another prop. Sometimes you'll get this socket thing, but you can just select none. And whenever it's parented to another prop like this, as long as your parent prop is selected here in your button manager, all of the other props attached to it will be shown with it. So now let's go back into our button manager. And the next thing we have is our items to hide. So in this, typically you would want to put the floor button or whatever you're using to purchase this button. So for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to create a quick custom prop button by right-clicking in my content browser, go into blueprint class, and then hitting creative building prop. I'm just going to name this floor button and quickly create one that I can use in this demonstration. All right, after quickly making one, I can drag it into the play space, and then I'm going to scale it up to place it over my trigger, or realistically you would want it underneath, but so I can see it, I'm just going to place it here and scale it how I want. Once I have this set up, I can go back into my button manager and select this for my items to hide as this floor button. And I'm also going to title this floor button 1 to keep track, and then minimize it here. Next, we have some extra devices. So these are extra devices that are built in, which are activated whenever you purchase this button. So we have an enable trigger. This will activate every single time a button is purchased. And then we have a disable trigger. This will activate whenever this button is reset. So if you make any custom things using this trigger, and then you want them to reset whenever the plot resets, this is the trigger that you use. Next, we have a cinematic that will play for the player whenever a button is purchased. This is a cinematic sequence device, which you can create your own level sequence to put inside. Then we have a car spawner 1 and car spawner 2. So whenever a button is purchased, the car spawner 1 will be disabled and the car spawner 2 will be enabled, making it so you can actually create an upgradable car mechanic in your game. Then we have a damage volume that will get enabled, and then last we have a tracker that will get incremented for the player. That's it for the extra devices. So let's close that. Then we have the cost resources. This is the resources that it will take to actually purchase this button. If we add an element, you'll see that we have the affect idle amount. This is whether or not it will take away from the player's idle resource rather than their base resource. Then we have the remove resource option. This will control whether or not costing this resource will actually remove the resource from the player. Then we have the amount, and then we have the resource name. You can create as many as these as you'd like, but let's go ahead and clear this. Then we have our gain resources. If we drop it down, we have an affect idle amount, an amount, and a resource name. If you want this button to increase the idle amount of a certain resource, you would just select this, change it to 10, and then change the resource name to something like money or one of the resources that you created in the game manager. But let's clear this. Last, we have a rise animation. This will control whether or not whenever the props are shown, if it will create an animation that will rise above their initial position a little bit and then drop back down, or if you have this disabled, it will automatically appear in its initial position without any animation. All right, so that's it for our first button. Let's go ahead and add another button here. If I drop this down, our activating devices, we've already created one. We have a button 2 trigger. Then we can close our activate devices. And right now we don't have a third button, so we can leave our activate devices to show empty. Then we have items to show. I'm going to leave this empty as well. But items to hide, let's go ahead and create a floor button for this button, and then we can keep this named floor button 2 for now. I'll go here and select this in my items to hide, and then I'm also going to enable rise animation. But with this button existing, we are also need to go back into our first button, and in the items to show, we want this button to also show. So let me go ahead and add a new element and select this button by picking an actor from the scene. All right, that's it for the buttons array. We can now move on to our Z offset. So whenever the buttons are hidden, they are teleported directly below the map. The Z offset is how much these buttons are teleported by. I would recommend to put this something around 15 to like 50,000. Anything more than that, you run the risk of going outside of the level bounds. So I would recommend something like 50,000 is a solid amount. Then we have our setting for props hidden at a time. Whenever all the props in a plot are initially hidden at the start of the game, if lots of props are moved and teleported at once, it will cause lag to the game server. Instead, using this setting, you can control how many props are hidden at a time. You can experiment with this a bit to kind of get the right amount for you depending on how many props you have, but a good range for me is anywhere from 3 to 10. The next setting we have is buttons color change. This setting controls whether or not buttons will change colors for the player if they have enough resources to purchase the button. So for example, instead of green, the button could be appearing red if the player does not have enough of a resource. And if the player does have enough of the resource, it will appear green. So if you would like this mechanic, you can just enable it here. But there's one more step you need to do for this mechanic, and that's to actually add the materials into our verse. So let's do this by clicking on verse. Then if you go to your button manager, you can scroll down or just look for the lines in the code. And here you'll see in between these lines that we have our material array. In this, you want to put both of your materials. The first element is when the player has enough, so this would be green. And then the second element is going to be when the player does not have enough. So an example of this is if you go to your content folder and create a new material. I'm going to call this green material and open this up. Then I'm just going to change the base color to a nice green and hit apply and save. Then you can duplicate this. And instead, I'm going to name this red matte. And I'm going to change the color in this material to a nice red. And hit apply and save. Now if we go back to our verse code, in our array here, the first option will be our success amount, which will be green matte. And then you'd want to put a comma. And for the next element, our red matte. That's all we need to do for the verse code for that option to work. There's a couple more things you have to do with your buttons to ensure that this setting works properly. The first is to tag all of your button props. So to do this, select your button, hit add, search for tag, and you'll see verse markup tag. And after you add this, if you drop down this gameplay tags option, go to this drop down and you want to select button tag. From now on, whenever you duplicate this button, all of the other buttons will also have this tag. But because I added the tag after duplicating the buttons, let's go back to this button here and do the same thing. So I'm going to add, go to tag, and then select our button tag that we have right here. The last thing that we need to do to ensure this button works is actually in your button blueprint. So if I open this up, the mesh that's going to actually change colors in our button has to be this static mesh component. So if you see here, we have both of these that neither are in the static mesh component. So instead, what I need to do is actually remove this mesh and then click on our static mesh component And for the static mesh, I'm going to change this to a cylinder. Then in the cylinder, first I'm just going to change the scale to 0.1. But as you can see, it overlaps our other button mesh. So I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger by just increasing the width. And then last, I'm just going to change this to a default material. Let's say green material, but it's going to change later, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, now we have a new button with our changing color mesh as the static mesh component rather than a subclass of it. So now let's save this and close out of that blueprint editor. You can see it's a little messed up, but that's because we've scaled it. So let's go ahead and scale these down. And now whenever we go into our game, the buttons will appear green if the player can afford it and red if the player cannot. Now let's go back into our button manager and drop down our indicator settings. These will control a map indicator, which will be a line that appears, and you can choose which buttons in which order the indicator will appear for. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually add a map indicator device. So if we go to our content browser and search for map indicator, then you can drag it right into your play space. In this, you don't actually need to change any colors, but what you do need to do is select it in the button manager. Now we can go back to this indicator button order. If I add an element, you'll see that we have a number which we can choose. This number will correspond to the element in your button array that this will move between. So if I leave this 0, the very first button will be what the indicator points to first. Then if I add a new element, let's say I want it to then point towards the third element in my button array, which doesn't exist yet, but if I did, this is how you'd do it. And you would continue this so that it's a steady stream through all of your buttons. Note that for this mechanic to work, you do need to tag all of your buttons with the button tag that we mentioned earlier for the color change mechanic. And that's it for covering the button manager device. Coming in from a later update, we also have one more setting called the button player location VFX. This is going to be a VFX spawner that's going to play at the player's location whenever they purchase a button. What you want to do inside of this VFX spawner device is select your custom visual effect that you want to play, but make sure to go down here, have enabled on reset, as well as have clear particles on disable turned off. That is all you need inside of this VFX spawner. This is mainly built in with one of the assets we provide, the Cloudburst, which you can find another tutorial on in this guide. But that's everything you need to know to set up the button manager device.